Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides, and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today, I have a guest, a repeat guest speaker, Brad Fuller from Brighton Living. Hello, Brad. How are you?
G'day, Min. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Well, this is the ultimate podcast today, I think. I've been trying to do this for the last 1 to 2 years, and thank you for encouraging me to step out and make these comments today. Today's podcast is called The SDA Wall of Shame. Now, let's begin with the definition of defamation, just so I was sure that we're not going to be in trouble here. Brad, the definition of defamation is as follows. Defamation refers to the act of damaging someone's reputation by making false statements about them to a third party. This can be done through spoken or written communication. Okay, so we won't mention any names or companies or locations because we wouldn't want to defame anyone, would we, Brad? Brad, we don't want to defame anyone, do we, today?
No, Min, we don't.
So we won't mention any names or companies or locations, okay?
No, it's just that now that we see houses hitting the ground, we're seeing the true tenancy of some of these houses. And if I wasn't getting weekly calls from investors, I just think it's time we talked about some of the case studies that we can actually verify now.
Yeah. I wanted to raise 6 or 7 points to begin with, and we'll talk about them in more detail with these case studies, Brad. Of particular concern out there in the SDA world, I think, are hidden commissions, conflict of interest, non-disclosure, when still operators operate as also SDA providers in the background without full disclosure, when SDA providers also work as property marketers as well without full disclosure, checking the company's setup of directors and shareholders of organisations in the NDIS world, or SDA world, sorry, and also us to let people know to be aware of those so-called joint venture profit share proposals by any providers out there in the NDIS SDA space. So, Brad, what's your 2 cents worth? I mean, you've been in the property game for 20, 30 years now. You've been in the SDA world for the last 4 or 5 years. How do you feel about all this negative activity by certain actors in the SDA world?
The reason that we see it now is because the houses are hitting the ground in large numbers. So during COVID, there was a wave of houses and apartments being created. But of course, huge building times delayed them getting them finished. And I said in a discussion the other day that had there not been COVID, we would have seen houses hitting the ground, 5 this month, 10 this month, 21 months. And there would have been a sequential list of houses just monthly, frequently, so many per month. But we didn't see that. We just saw this wave of houses that was building. And I did use the analogy that it's a bit like, in F1, in the car racing, you can be 4 laps ahead and suddenly there's a crash, the safety car comes out and everybody crosses the finish line together. COVID was the safety car. And what it has meant that we never saw this, a few houses finishing in the timeline that we could then evaluate were they being tenanted or not. And unfortunately, we saw many of the houses delayed 18 months, some 2 years. In Perth, there have been big delays. In Queensland, there were large delays. In Victoria, everywhere, there were large delays through COVID. But of course, while this wave of houses was building and not being completed, everybody was still selling behind that. So when that wave finally broke, which was kind of around November last year, now we've got literally all the participants that were waiting, literally they were all suddenly had houses that they could jump into for tenancy because they'd been waiting for them so long. And in some areas, even like Townsville, for instance, the participant demand has gone very, very low there because so many houses hit the ground. And Townsville is certainly one of those areas where there's a massive oversupply of houses. And of course, the data had shown that to us, over a year and a half ago. I predicted that the data was showing that there were too many building approvals coming through, so we knew that was happening. But what we have seen is now we're going to see the true nature of tenancy. We're going to see the true nature of where did you build your house? Where were you told to build your house? And if you didn't really listen to the data from an SDA provider or participants or still providers who genuinely have participants waiting on their books, then you could have been told data that was manipulated, and you've built in a place where now you don't have tenants because there are so many houses that have hit the ground. And I know that in Victoria, there are suburbs in Victoria, and unfortunately where mostly the cheaper land was. So if you go back a year or 2 years ago, when the land was, 200,000, 210, 220, that's where everybody was trying to sell packages of NDIS houses on a price point. And some of the, SDA providers who were, some SDA providers are actually owned by builders. And if you do a company search, you can find out that they're all linked in the background somehow. So unfortunately, we had some SDA providers supporting builders in areas where investors should never have built.
Yep, totally agree with you, Brad. But there's good practice and bad practice in terms of development and product rollout. But today's podcast, Brad, is about the wall of shame. Okay, let's talk about some examples of a couple of handful of brands out there, which we won't mention their names. I've written their name on this piece of paper. We won't mention their names at all. And let's talk about one or two of their dirty tactics that they do out there in the marketplace, which tricks innocent investors into engaging them to do business with.
Well, the NDIS data is flawed, as I've said on many speaking tours and podcasts, and I think even here at NDIS Property. If you look at the NDIS data, it's 3 months in arrears. That's its basic flaw. But sometimes the data you can quote data from 6 months ago. And I wonder if anybody actually goes and checks or goes through thoroughly the spreadsheets that the NDIS put out to even get some guideline over what's happening. I mean, in Perth, I've seen data reports in Perth where there's like 1,200 houses still needed in Perth. But I noticed that data was drawn from months ago.
But Brad, do you think there are market players like agents and marketers and SDA providers who are knowingly using incorrect SDA data to convince their buyers to invest in a certain location?
We can see that now that all these houses have hit the ground, and it is disgraceful. But what it's doing is it doesn't help participants, which is where we come from, because they're not getting the houses in the areas where they actually want to live. I mean, if you go to Facebook at the moment, you could swear you could buy a house for $800,000 or less, and you'll get 26% returns and $220,000 a year. And look, investors really need to be cautious, because that means that every house would need 3 high physical support participants to achieve that number. And it's very rare that we see 3 high physical support people in the one house.
So let's just clarify here. The first matter is real estate people who don't understand SDA and are flogging a product which they understand, nor are they giving the right risks, warnings, awareness to the innocent investors, and being fooled through negligence or innocence that they will get 190 grand rent a year. So that's the first thing. So that's the most innocent of all behaviors out there, Brad, when agents don't know what they're doing. Do you agree?
I'm not sure they don't know what they're doing. I'm concerned that
they do know.
The commission of the sale is what the driving force is, not doing the best they can for participants by building a home in an area. I mean, there's some Facebook ads out there that are people on videos, and some of them very, very powerful presentations.
Very slick,
right? That are, I've had 3 calls about one of them only in the last month. One of those presentations led a client that called me. They had built or been told to build a four-bedroom, participant bedroom, robust home about 40 minutes outside of Toowoomba in a small little estate that someone had done. And they also said they didn't need to talk to an SDA provider, and that the NDIA would place people in that house.
Rubbish.
So, when I started to talk about choice and control, that participants will choose their house because it's more desirable, this fellow has put all this money into this house, convinced by a very powerful story. And look, the NDIS is a very powerful story. And it's a bit like, though, you can wield that sword for good or you can wield that sword for evil. But to get someone to build a 4-bedroom robust, and as you know, Min, even one robust person in a house is all that we see. I've never seen one where you have two behaviours in robust that are compatible. And I know that there's been a lot of businesses out there selling robust houses, a 2-bedroom with a breakout room, 3-bedroom, sometimes not with a breakout room. But the fact remains, nobody told those investors the truth. And now these houses are hitting the ground. Investors are finding that, hey, I've got a 3-bedroom robust, but I'll only ever be able to get one client in there. Or they have to convert the house to try and attempt to get improved livability. But, as you know, in the review, the improvability category is in danger of, as a recommendation to remove it. So those robust houses were sold to people on a very, very powerful story of returns. And look, to be fair, if we were all very honest, there's a little bit of investor greed involved in that because, that story of robust housing, if you go back with me past July 2023, on average across Australia, a high physical support return on investment was about $50,000 and robust was $65,000. Now, as we know, the new funding's a lot more, but a lot of these houses were sold pre-July last year. So they were sold on the premise of, why would you build a 3-bedroom HBS house? If you build a 3-bedroom robust house, you'll get 3 times 65,000. Now, if you didn't do your homework as an investor, you could possibly believe that. But whoever told you that story, they're either uninformed or they were not an SDA provider or they weren't anybody who was participant-led, because nobody would have said to them, that's a good idea. Trying to find compatible, robust behaviours to go into a house it's not even just mission difficult. It is literally mission impossible. And I know possibly out there are some behaviours that may be mild enough that they could live together, but I haven't seen them. So that powerful story, and that's why I say there's a little bit of investor greed involved but you know what? Investors are trying to also provide for their families. I've always said you can't do this for love. You've got to have a balance in looking after the participants as our primary mandate, but you all have to be respectful to someone who's spending 1 or 1.5 as well.
So I know exactly what you're talking about, Brad. One of these companies here on our list, talking about selling 4-bedroom robust houses, have no provider associated with them, have no license to sell real estate at all, right? The biggest shameful act you can do as a professional service in selling SDA is to be on video on Facebook or YouTube and pretend to make yourself out as an expert and have no license to give that advice. No real estate license to sell the property, no financial advice license to give financial advice, and then dare say, we don't give advice. But yet they're selling 15 or 20 a month.
Look, I know that there are some people out there pushing robust homes to this day. And I get calls probably at least 2 a week from clients who now have discovered that they built a 2 or 3 bedroom robust home. And unfortunately, they were also told by the builder or the seller or the SDA provider, who is also linked to builders, that there's no need to contact. You'll be right. We'll advertise this property in the last few months of the house. Now, the reason I believe they do that is for 2 reasons. They're selling so many houses into the one postcode or into the one area that they don't want to see the houses on Housing Hub. I mean, there are some areas in across Australia. If you go to Housing Hub, you can see how many houses are there. And I'm not sure how many investors actually took the time to look at how many houses were being built or on Housing Hub, which gives you some indication. But some of these, unfortunately, SDAs are telling people, you don't need to worry about tenancy until the last few months as the house is finished. Now, mostly, as you know, that's probably a real estate provider, someone who's come from real estate and into the SDA world thinking it's a rent roll. And look, nothing could be further from the truth. That is not the mandate of an SDA provider. That's why we just do SDA. We look and focus on the participants. Our COO is an actual NDIS participant, and we are very conscious that that's what we do. But we also...
Can I say, Brad, on that very point, be careful when you talk to a SDA provider who talks about how they do traditional real estate and they're running a property management business as well in the background, okay? Those are the ones who came into the SDA world for profit and greed, not because they care. That is my bold statement. You may disagree, who's listening to this podcast, but you know what? In my personal opinion, you're either an SDA provider, that's all you do, or you're a property manager, that's all you do. You should never cross in this world. Because I've seen two very prominent property managers in Queensland here who've become SDA providers, and they are just dodgy as dirt. You can tell that they are. All the complaints I hear from everyone about them, they don't belong in SDA. And you know what? It's just use some common sense.
Look, could I firstly say, most of the SDA providers that we associate with, they have participants at heart, and that's the whole point, right? But
that's all they do, Brad. That's all they do.
That's correct. The ones who do property marketing from their SDA world, there's obviously an automatic conflict. If the SDA provider is selling you a house in a certain area, then of course maybe the commission is driving them that they get from the builder, rather than is it the best location, is it the best design for a participant? And I know some of the houses out there are like this fellow in Toowoomba. I just felt so sorry for him, and I couldn't help him because not only did he have a 4-bedroom robust home, and he was sold by a video presentation on Facebook that why would you build a 3-bedroom robust? Why not build a 4-bedroom and you'll get 4 times 65,000? That is just so wrong, and I didn't know how to help him at all.
A red flag to our listeners are, if you're talking to someone who does 2 of the following 3 things, run away. They are an SDA provider, they are an SDA project marketer selling real estate, and they are also a property manager, traditional property manager. In this game of SDA, I think you should only be good at one thing, be a There's an old saying, Brad. The old, I'm a master of, jack of all trades, master of none, right? So why would you want to do business with a jack of all trades who is not a specialist in SDA, who sort of does SDA provider role on as a side hustle, right? You should only work with people who are genuinely interested in looking after the best interests of investors and participants. Now, you said so in the past, Brad, when you talk to someone who doesn't have the language of disability, you know straight away. You see that so many times now, Brad. And I urge our listeners here who are listening, if you're talking to a real estate person who's now acting as a provider, SDA provider, do not do that.
Look, there's a really simple test. In our COO, Brendan Wolf, who is an NDIS participant living in his an apartment in Queensland, he believes wholeheartedly that the first question you should ask any SDA provider is, how many people with disability are you employing in your upper management? Now, if you haven't got that in your management team, how can you be communicative? And look, there are many advocates out there in SDA. I acknowledge that there are many people who are purely interested in the welfare of the participant, as we all should be. But even those companies, you'd think that they would be employing people of disability in management, steering that ship, because guess what? Participants choose their provider. So if you're a company that doesn't have someone employed, that has a disability who truly understands. I mean, I am a great advocate for this space. I'm very passionate about it, as you know. But being able-bodied, a participant is obviously going to prefer to talk to somebody who has a disability and has endured what they've had to endure. And that's what we're finding at Brighter Living, that people are now coming to us because we talk that language of disability. Our COO is a participant. So that's what you need first. Secondly, you just need to know they're an advocate, that they're doing only SDA. I mean, I've even seen SDA providers say, oh, look, there's a package here with a house, but if you choose this package, we have to be the SDA provider. Now, that should ring an alarm bell so loud in an investor's head that if the SDA providers say, because choice and control, participant chooses the SDA provider and investors have the right to choose their SDA provider. Now, if you're choosing it on the basis of a house land package, if that's how you're choosing your SDA provider, just think that through for a minute. Why is the SDA provider saying we have to be the SDA provider if you buy this package and we're providing it?
And that there is a conflict of interest.
Oh, a massive conflict of interest. It is, and it's out there. It's, if any SDA provider is condoning, some of the areas that I'm seeing houses, and I'm only doing this podcast with you, Min, because I'm getting the calls weekly now. Help me, they've heard me on the podcast. Our brand is getting stronger out there. As you know, I've been involved in SDA providership now for nearly 4 years and understand property as well. But it's disheartening. And I just wanted, as you said, when you invited me to this podcast, I wanted just to make it clear because investors also are paying the price here. They're investing sometimes, they're a lot of money, 700,000 to, in Sydney, 1.5 million on housing that you need to know is in the right area. And unfortunately, a lot of the investors have been told to buy in greenfield estates way away from infrastructure. And guess why? Now their houses are empty. And of course, the SDA providers who supported those areas originally are now saying, oh, well, the market's changed or making some excuse. But the builders already made their margin on doing so.
So, Brad, I know we've been talking the last 25 minutes about very generic. I want to go specific now. Let's go specific. The SDA Wall of Shame, I want to address 6-7 different examples of companies in Australia that are doing really bad things in the SDA space. Okay, and I'll feel free to jump in if you want, Brad. But if you want to still stay silent, that's fine. But I'm gonna make these comments. Company number 1 on your list there, right? They are an SDA provider. They charge consultancy fees to be engaged. They demand that if they will only manage stock if you use their plumber, their electrician, their town planner, their architect, all right? And why do you think someone demands an innocent investor to use their plumber, their town planner, their architect, their services consultancy-wise, because they're being paid under the table? Particularly when investors are paying 200, 300, 400 grand over the market price, with the faint hope that they will have their houses filled up with participants. Okay? Now, rumor has it that the NDIS is chasing after this company. I won't mention their name or where they're based, but they're overseas at the moment. All right? And shame on them for ripping off all these investors out there in the SDA space by overcharging fees. And we've had so many builders come to us complaining about how these guys are ripping the builders off and the mum and dads off. Okay? That's number 1 there. Number 2 is another builder somewhere else, in a different state in Australia. And, through no fault of their own, not purposely doing anything wrong, but aligning themselves up with a large national SDA provider to say it's a provider-led product. Lo and behold, the provider is a SIL provider and an SDA provider offering investors a 60-40 split, 60% profit share on the SDA income and the SIL income, which is 60% to the provider and 40% to the investor. And apparently, would turn out to be 220 to 240 grand a year in rent in the investment. But the problem is, a lot of these houses are empty now because this provider's walked away from their management lease agreement of not promising, but of trying to provide this 40% split of revenue back to the investor, which would turn out to be 200 grand a year in revenue. And there are so many people ringing me up as well, Brad, complaining about how they got duped by this said provider who's attached to this other builder, and they're just crying over the phone. And there's so many of them out there. And I won't mention the location or the builder or the provider, but there's only one company out there I know of doing this, and that's a pretty large company. And I think I hear in the grapevine that a lot of law firms and lawyers are circling around this organization, right? But lo and behold, they are also a property marketer as well. They're a SIL provider and an SDA provider and a project marketer selling SDA stock. So they're clipping the ticket all the way through as a SIL provider, as an SDA provider, as a project marketer, right? And, Jesus, what can I say? When you're just so greedy that you have to do everything out there to make a single dollar. And I won't say rip people off, but gee, when you're having all these empty houses all around Australia empty, side by side, in Brisbane, Darwin, Melbourne, it's a bad look. It's a very, very bad look. Another provider I know of, I won't mention where they are a property marketeer and a property management business and an SDA provider. They tick all three conflicts right there.
Oh, no conflict there.
All conflicts everywhere. But you know what? What I found out? They are not a director of the provider because they were bankrupt, right? Both guys were bankrupted. They put the business names under their wife's name. So back to using common sense here, people. If you're talking to an SDA provider who is not the director of the SDA business, why is that the case? Who is the director? If it's their wife or their sister, why is that? Because ASIC deemed that they are no longer able to be a director of a company because of other past discretions, right? So always be careful of who you do business with and look for the skeletons in the closet, okay? Because there are those guys out there who are doing such activities, okay? So be careful there. Now, another provider, a marketer, number 5 on the list here, Brad, number 5, they're making 90 grand to 100 grand commission on house packages, right? And I know for a fact that they don't care about participants. They're just selling stock, making a quick buck to do a runner, right? And it's a shame to see so many victims fall for such trickery, okay? Remember what we said? Look at their background, look at their directorships, look at their language, their body language, or their language over a phone call. See how they talk to you. Do they talk disability? Do they really care about SDA and participants? Or do they only care about commissions and making money? Because there are a lot, Brad, I want to say this to you right now, to your face, that I've come across, myself personally, a lot of agents who've spoken to my face in my office who said, I'm only selling this product because they pay me upfront commissions, 100% upfront, and I'm on my last leg before I retire, so I want to make as much money as possible as I can before I retire. And they don't give a shite about the product or the participant or the investor because all they care about is the commission. And it's a shame to hear it to my face in my office. And when I say to them, mate, one day you're going to become undone because someone's going to sue you for your lack of appropriate advice or lack of due diligence, right? And blowing their life savings away. And you'll be held accountable because you're not licensed at all in any state of Australia in the property real estate world except your own. And another guy sat in my office only a month ago. He said, oh, no, I used to be a financial advisor, but now I'm no longer a financial advisor. I'm just going to be doing SDA now. And when I questioned him about this, he's I'm not giving advice. No, my clients will follow my lead, but I'm not giving advice. I said, dude, come on. You're giving advice. You're making them buy stuff wherever it's going to be. I don't know where it end up being. You can't claim the whole, I didn't give advice. You are giving advice, okay? So be careful, our listeners. If you're talking to people, right, who are doing SDA for the first time or have no experience, have no real estate license, have no licensing, right, because they do not know what they're doing. And we get so many, I'm sure Brad does, and so do I. We get so many calls from innocent mum and dads who've been burned badly by people who don't know what they're doing. And we encourage you as investors to take your time, ask questions, ask for it in writing. Brad, do you agree, Brad? Ask for your formal advice in writing because you know what? If they never put it in writing, they never actually said it because when they say, as Brad said earlier, oh, don't worry, mate, don't worry about the provider. It's all good. We'll worry about it at the very end. No, get that in writing. Get it in writing. Because if you don't get it in writing, it's your word versus their word in court.
Look, there is, as we know, there are a lot doing the wrong thing, but there are a lot doing the right thing. And it's, I know all the hard questions to ask because I have a history in property as well as an SDA provider. Our COO has had a lifetime of experience in disability. But what I have noticed is we've been able to associate ourselves with people who are selling product that always want to do the right thing.
You mean like me?
Like you, man.
Just making very clear, I'm not on the wall of shame.
No, you're not on the wall of shame. But there's a lot of people who are selling property, I know, who have identified what you're talking about and don't want to be part of it. And what happens is like-minded people gravitate together. And so there are a lot of those, and a lot of them are just individuals who've broken away from some of the big companies because they didn't like the ethos within that. But they find us, and you know what? They don't move unless we go and give advice on the location and the design of the house, because we never, ever, ever want to be getting a phone call from an investor that says, Brad, my house is empty. And we have said no many, many more times in our company, even since Brighter Living has come into form. We've said no many times because there is no outcome other than let's get a house in the right location, a desirable design, and get the right SDA that's connected to participants. Because I've always said that is really important. Don't see an SDA with a conflict. Ask them straight up, how many people with disability did you employ in your upper management? But you also need to do, as you said, search out, do some searches, find out who's behind that SDA. Are they a property marketer and an SDA? I mean, that...
And a SIL?
Well, look, the government, there's a lot of talk around SDA and SIL being the same. And look, there are a lot of great companies that do both. But this is the issue. Let's talk about the NDIA issue with this. If you're an SDA provider and a SIL provider, you have total control of the house. So in our world, we actually, if the SIL provider was doing the wrong thing, our agreements allow us to remove the SIL with the participants' wishes, of course, and if something was going wrong. But we've seen scenarios over the years, and when I mean we, I mean Brendan and I have seen scenarios where the participant has had to leave the house because it's controlled by the SIL and the provider. So I know from Brendan that participants are very wary of going into a house where the SIL and the SDA are the same. And they're also getting very aware now about the housing where if you're the SDA provider, but you're also selling property, you're the SDA provider, and you're also marketing particular areas yourself, they're seeing there's a conflict. So you just have to be cautious and do your homework. And I think that a lot of investors rushed in and did not do their due diligence. They got caught up in a very powerful story. And you know why it's powerful? Because it's true. If you build in the right area, those returns are absolutely there where you can help someone with disability, but also help your family with a great return. But go spend $800,000 or $1 million in the wrong place, and you just burnt your, some future for your family.
So, Brad, in the marketplace, do you know of many companies offering that data research back-end support in writing as a document to investors?
Well, no, but I have seen a lot of data that is certainly tweaked to make the area where they're selling the land look better than it is.
That's a bit of a shameful act, true, but actual good representative data reports provided to the market investors. Have you seen many companies doing it?
No, there's very few, but I know that you guys do that. We do that. We also look very closely at building approvals coming in, because if you recognize the NDIS data is flawed in the ways that I've talked about before, particularly 3 months in arrears, a lot can happen in 3 months. And of course, there's now a digital trail of data. So you've got to be cautious that the data you're reading about isn't from a year ago where it says there's, another 1,200 homes, like in Perth. The data says 1,200 homes.
For all you listeners out there who are being given NDIA quarterly data from 2 months ago or 3 months ago, that's not what I mean by data. That's just public information in the domain of Google on NDIS website. I'm talking about real, authentic, customized data research reports provided by said company to the investor. That's what I mean. And I've only come across one company, if not two, in Australia doing it, plus us, 3. I don't know many people offering these reports, because people always say, oh, yeah, I saw the data online. No, that's really not the right data.
I'm hoping one of those 3 is us, because we actually make sure we look at data from the companies that are truly doing it right. But it's not just analysing the data from the NDIA. It is actually getting on the ground, talking to civil providers, looking at how many houses are coming up. You know, there's a place in Perth, Min, where there are 17 houses, NDIS houses, in the same street. Now,
what street is that, may I ask?
No, you can't ask that. But, you know, the developer morally should have said no. The builder building them, just because, you know, here's a builder that goes, like all builders do. They go to developers and they get 10, 20 blocks of land. Now, hopefully they would get land that is scattered through an estate. But sometimes they get, 10 blocks, lots 2 to 20 in a certain street. But you shouldn't have sold them all to NDIS. And in some of these areas, they were the cheapest land in Australia at the time. And that's no reason to put an SDA home in an area where just because it's the cheaper land.
And also back to the wall of shame, be very careful, because we've come across 1 or 2 providers who are in the background land developers as well. Or maybe not developers, but maybe land investors, where they acquire a larger block of land, subdivide it, add $100,000 commission on top of it as a margin, and then sell it as a house land package with a builder, as a provider or participant-led package. And lo and behold, at the end of this process, there's no participants, or they've done the runner, or they've terminated the head lease agreement. So that's also a deserves mentioning on the SDA wall of shame, when a provider is also really, in fact, a land developer in the background, and they're using the charade, the facade of being a provider to entice people in to buy their expensive blocks of land. So that's also another comment there as well.
Look, some of the builders that are out there prolifically marketing, if you said to some builders, where's the best land for NDIS in Australia? Well, it's probably the 10 blocks I just took off that developer recently, where I get a $10,000 kickback from the developer. That's the best land, of course. And some of these builders in different states, they never talk about, land that's in Queensland or New South Wales or Adelaide and across an Australia viewpoint, of course, the best land is only in the area where they build. And that's also, you've got to be cautious with that. That's why we develop relationships with, as I said, we say no a lot, but we've developed relations with a lot of people who are selling property. We just want to make sure that their investors are in a place where they have certainty of tenancy. Now, usually that's in a place where it's a lot more money than $800,000. But because some people say, oh, that's all I want to spend, because if you look on Facebook and the internet, you'd swear you can get a great house and get those huge returns. This is mythical. It is advertisements that are not going to deliver to people. They're only going to deliver you hurt. And I'm seeing that now.
I want to add to that there. Whatever you think you're getting for your investment return for SDA, you've been sold the dream, halve it. Halving it that's the real number there. So if you thought 190, 200 grand was the awesome number you saw on Facebook that was convincing you to go into SDA, just halve it down to half, which is going to be $100,000 to $95,000 to $100,000. That's the real number you'll get. Either as gross or net, doesn't matter. That's the real number. So don't believe everything you say. If it's too good to be true, then you know what I mean.
Look,
Walk away.
Only in some of these areas that are a long way from the cities. There is many homes that participants are going to be very grateful to live in, but there are a lot of participants that have not used their SDA funding, and that's because they're waiting for houses or dwellings to come up in a location where they want to live. I mean,
please go to housinghub.org.au to see the listings of empty houses in that area. Before you buy anything anywhere in Australia, look at Housing Hub, please.
No, and look, you've got to get advice either from participants or from an SDA provider that actually just does SDA, because then there's no conflict. Then you know the interests of the participant are at heart, and that way, as for us, for instance, unless the market changes dramatically, our advice is current. Our advice is certainly putting houses on the ground in areas where we know participants want them. And that's the key. I'm just disheartened by the number of calls we're getting now that all these houses are hitting the ground in areas so far away that these guys are wondering. And I had a call the other day and they've been through 3 SDA providers now, and now they've found us and are ringing. And it's disheartening to be able to say, how did you get convinced to build a house in that location?
Brad, when I get these calls myself, I always ask the question, who was the builder? Who was the agent who sold to you? And who's the SDA provider? And I always ask those questions because it's giving me a lot of intel. Call it a survey. Give me a lot of intel as who the players are who are doing the wrong thing out there in the marketplace. Over to you.
No, look, I'm pleased to say that all the people that we deal with, we've gone through, if you want me to be your SDA provider, we do come with conditions. And that is location, design, and participant contact.
DDD, data, design, and desirability. Remember that, yeah.
Yes, very good, Mick. Data, design, and desirability. Desirability being the really big factor that a lot of people who just believed in the powerful story of SDA, you can get those returns if you've built in an area close into cities, close into infrastructure. But if you've been in an area where, currently, like a few years ago, if it was very cheap land, $200,000 or less, then you could be in trouble. However, there are some of those areas where the land just was cheap and they're in great areas, and we've actually recommended some of those places because we know SIL providers in that area who have participants that they're transitioning from SIL to SDA, and that's another reason some of the data's flawed. A lot of SIL providers have people that they genuinely want to transition into SDA, but they haven't been picked up in the SDA data yet. So we try to spend a lot of time not listening, using the SDA data as a guide, but then drilling down into how many houses are coming through. What are the potential for SIL providers in the area? We're in contact with participants, aged care, hospitals. We're looking at the legacy homes and how many people are coming out of that. It's off the ground data and it's real time. It's not 3 months in arrears and it's not manipulated, because I can tell you now, from our perspective, we only, in a commercial sense, we only get a percentage of what an investor gets, when we do our provision work. Now, so we need to make the investor successful. The way we make the investor successful is to absolutely ensure our data is right on the mark for the right location. Absolutely, that the design is something a participant will look at and come into. And also that we want to know that we just do SDA, and the participants will, if they have to pick up the call to ring for a serious issue, they know that there's someone on the end of the phone that's going to understand their needs.
There's also another part of this whole world, SDA Wall of Shame, where there are providers out there who charge a fee to get engaged, promise the world, and then deliver nothing. Brad, you want to comment on that?
Look, there is a danger in that some SDAs say yes to everything. They take an engagement fee, and as we do too. We take an engagement fee because there's a lot of work to do. But we don't wait till the last 2 months. At Brighter Living, we want to get engaged when the builder says, I'm going to be on site, to give us the full 7 to 9 months of the build time, not just to find participants, but to also match their personalities. Give me any reason on this earth why anybody would say to an investor, I'll wait till the end of the build to start looking for participants.
And have there been people saying that?
Oh, plenty. And I suspect that they say that, one, because if they started to do what we do and look at, starting when the bill goes down, you'd have double the number of houses on Housing Hub. And I think, unfortunately, that's one of the things that's happening. So you should ask the question, why are you not marketing my house to participants from the very day we're fully unconditional and the house goes ahead? I mean, I never want to take on a house from an investor that has some doubt. Like, we don't want to go in before it's got building approval and unconditional, because sometimes we find participants very early. So I don't want to ever go back to a participant and say, oops, sorry, the investor didn't get finance or the land didn't register. We don't want to do that. We don't want to disappoint anybody. So just be 110% sure. And when I can be sure, it's when the builder says, everything's ready to go, I'm on site in 2 weeks' time. That is the ideal time to engage an SDA provider. And look, I can tell you, our engagement fee, there's no profit in that. There's a lot of work to be done, going out, email campaigns, talking with all the networks that I've established and Brendan's established over the years. We do inspections, we look at the houses, we try to get all the stakeholders, the support coordinators, planners, parents and guardians to come and inspect the house, or transition people by looking even in the location, because it's a big deal for someone to transition from where they are into a new area. So we would like to show people the areas where the house is being built. So there's just no excuse. It's not like normal property where you advertise in the last 2 months. That's just madness. I don't know why I'd be questioning any SDA provider who said they want to wait till the end.
I want to wrap it up, Brad, by giving a few little pointers to our listeners. Some solutions to avoid the bad actors in the SDA world. And that is, number one, request formal written advice from the selling agent or from the provider. Just get some written advice. Number two, request full disclosure. If you think there's any funny business in the background, ask for full disclosure of their companies, business trading names, shareholdings, or whatever that could jeopardize the transaction there. And that also includes hidden margins and referral fees and commissions as well. Number three, check on the licensing of the organization, the licensing of the property agency, or the licensing of the registered provider. Do not work with an unregistered provider. Do not work with an unlicensed real estate expert. Because they're not licensed, they have no, accountability to a code of ethics, right? For example, if you're getting property advice from a financial advisor or a mortgage broker, by law, they must declare any hidden commissions or soft dollar benefits, which is non-monetary benefits, like free tickets to an event or a free car or whatever. They must disclose that in their FSG, Financial Services Guide, or in writing that they're getting a kickback somewhere, okay? Because a financial advisor or a mortgage broker must always operate in the best interests of their clients, right? And I can guarantee you out there are many financial advisors selling SDA real estate that is not in the best interests of their clients and are getting $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 under the table kickbacks via their side company owned by their wife. Okay? I know how these guys operate. I've been in the game for 25 years here, right? Those cowboys who don't want to declare it, hey mate, all I want to say to you is, if you've nothing to be ashamed of, why are you hiding the information, right? Because if there's a shortfall valuation on a client's purchase by 40, 50, 60, 70 grand, that money was because you took a 60, 70 grand kickback on the side under the table without doing the right thing, okay? And shame on you for doing such actions, okay? So anyway, my point is to everyone listening, get written advice, ask for full disclosure, do the background checks, look at their history, look at their licensing, and question the code of conduct, right? Question it. Because Larissa in my office here, she was with me 3 weeks ago, a newbie agent said to us, oh, can you give me 60, 70 grand commission so I can pay the other guy a 30 grand commission on the side? Like, dude, what the hell are you doing that for? You've just increased the cost of purchase for the poor mum and dad by 40, 50 grand for no reason, right? That's just downright low. And shame on you for doing that, okay? And it goes back to what I said earlier. There are agents out there who are unlicensed earning up to 100 grand commission, hidden away in the builder's margins as well. Shame on you, because you ripped off a customer with 100 grand, okay? And you know full well you don't care about the outcome. And I bet you do the runner at some point soon. run away overseas and hide over there. I know. There are some guys already starting to do that already, and I could see it from a mile away, okay? Because in this world of SDA, which is a blend of three things, it's a blend of financial advice, property advice, and disability advice, okay? You come to us in Yes Property Australia, we will always put the advice in writing to you and back it up with real data. I challenge you to go out there and meet 4 or 5 other companies that'll do the same thing as us. No way. They're too afraid to do so. Because you know why? They're unlicensed and they're inexperienced and they don't want to be sued. Okay? And that, my friend, is the truth. Brad, any final words of advice from you before we hang up our 1-hour podcast here?
I think it's just being educated enough to know the right questions to ask. And some of what you said, we here at Big Brighter Living, we always ask those hard questions of anybody we deal with. And we are dealing with a great number of good people. Like, we ask those questions of anybody who's selling the investment. And we've got some participants have just had great houses built because those people come from a place where they understand the whole thing is about provide a home for a participant. And if you continue to come from that perspective, and if you're an investor and you can see that from the people you're talking to, that's what we're interested in. So all our relationships are formed from asking those hard questions. And as I said, we're happy to be the SDA provider, but if you want us to do that, we come with conditions. And some of those conditions don't suit some of the people that you're talking about out there.
So Brad, I'm going to be direct to you. Do you sell property?
No.
Are you a SIL provider?
No.
So you're just an SDA provider. That's all you do, right?
Oh, that's correct. We've certainly guided people. Like, I give a lot of advice to investors who are referred to us by people who sell property.
But you're not making money as a SIL provider or as a real estate agent. You're not, are you?
No, that is correct.
Well, so here's the thing. The SDA world is lucrative. It's profitable. It's growing massive. Why does people out there have to cut corners to make an extra buck here and there? Why? If you do the right thing and you're honest and transparent, you can do good business and do well. Why do you need to taint yourself by doing so many different things?
Well, it's a good triangle. Like, if the participant wins because we get a great house built by an investor in the right area, that participant knows it's a great house, they choose it. The investor then gets the maximum return that house can deliver. And of course, then from our perspective, commercially, we get a small percentage, 10% of what the investor receives. And then that triangle, everybody wins: participant, the investor, and the SDA provider. And if you're not happy about that, there's no need to go after more money in this world. You can do some community good, as I've always said, and also protect your family and give a future for your family. But if you build it out there in the middle of nowhere, you're not helping your family. You've listened to some advice where you've just burnt, nearly $1 million. And I'm trying to protect people. And the reason I agreed to do this was to try and help protect people from doing that, because it doesn't help participants. If they don't want to live in the area where you're building the house, it doesn't matter how you've been sold the story of it. If participants don't want to live there, and I can tell you, we are getting the calls. The houses have hit the ground, and it's very hard. They're disheartening stories.
So my final words of advice to anyone listening, and sorry for saying it in front of Brad here, and that is, those who come into the SDA world as a SDA provider should be doing it for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. And when I say the wrong reasons, I mean the following. This is my personal opinion, and I could be wrong, but I'm rarely wrong, right? And this is what I said to Brad a year ago, right? Those who come into the SDA world to be an SDA provider, their goal is to hit 100 houses or properties in their portfolio. Why? Because in the world of property management, it's like monopoly. Get as much as you can under your portfolio, clean it up, and sell it off. Because 100 houses in SDA portfolio is about $4 or $5 million as a sale figure. And I know there's a fund manager in Australia that has bought up 30 SDA providers, right? Again, they're playing the numbers game, multiples. And one day in the future, they'll sell off to an international fund manager, okay? So just like Pac-Man, you're out there running around trying to chop up all the pellets, right? The SDA providers trying to get their houses. The SDA providers being called up by the fund managers. The fund managers being gobbled up by the big international fund managers. It's all big international funds management game out there, okay? Multiple of incomes. So, it's rare. I want to say this very clearly. It's rare to come across an SA provider like yours, Brad, that has 10% fee. The average majority of people out there are 15% to 20% out there, 15 to 20% as a fee. So, just look at who you're talking to as a SDA provider business, SDA provider business. Why are they doing this? Are they doing it for the money, or are they doing it for the good nature of the community? Okay, and that applies back to everything in SDA, be it builders, developers, investors, agents, marketers, SDA providers, consultants, whoever they may be. Right? Shame on you if all you talk about is money, money, money. Because I come across a lot of people who only talk about money, 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 and that's all they care about. They don't care about participants. No, they're just doing their best to milk the system and have that. What's the word? The golden. When someone retires, Brad? It's the golden pen or the parachute. What? Sorry,
the gold watch. You mean?
Yeah. It's their last hurrah going out of the working world. Okay. So just look at who they are, what their background is. Look at their structure, their setup, the brand. Okay, so question everything, get everything in writing, because as I said in a previous podcast, Brad, which should be aired next week or 2 weeks, but I watched Kung Fu Panda 4, and the villain said to Po, the panda, there are 3 street rules in our world, Kung Fu Panda. And when I heard it, I thought, my God, those 3 rules apply to the SDA world. Rule number 1 on the street, do not trust anybody. Rule number 2 on the street, somebody always gets hurt. And rule number 3 on the street, when you do get hurt, nobody cares. Okay? So those 3 rules, in my enlightened moment, watching this Kung Fu Panda at the cinemas, told me they're the same rules that apply to SDA. And I urge you all to be very, very, very careful who you talk to, who you listen to, and get things in writing. Because you know why? I hear all the bad stories from all the bad actors via all the investors who are crying poor. I hear it all, right? And I can't defame these people because then I'll be destroyed myself. But don't for a moment think that you may be getting the right advice all the time. Okay? Be very careful. Brad, thank you so much for your time. It's been over an hour and 10 minutes, I think.
Well, I'd just like to say, I don't think the SDA world is like Kung Fu, and I don't think it's that bad. And there's a lot of great people. There's a lot of heartfelt SIL providers, and people out there. The only thing I'd add is I know that a lot of SDA providers got houses all over Australia, and even Brendan said, how do they? If something goes wrong in the house, how do you get there to fulfill your primary mandate of looking after the people in that house? I mean, and it's no good to have, it's no good getting a real estate agent to go there, because the primary mandate of the SDA is to look after the participants. So,
Brad, we have so much more to talk about. I'm sure we do. Let's consider this part A of our SDA Wall of Shame. All right. And I would welcome another catch up with you in person to do part B of this SDA Wall of Shame, talking about other bad actors in the community who are doing the wrong thing by the SDA world. Okay.
Well, the calls are coming a lot now. And so I'm sure we'll have more case studies that are actually real to communicate to everybody. And hopefully, that people can just build the houses in the right areas.
Brad, thank you so much for your time, mate. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Vin.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.